It says we're now live. So, can you ask to join? I'm waiting for Lee Muser of Integrative Healing to join me for this live. We're scheduled to start at 9, but we're just getting everything set up. Oh, Dee Heibel joined. Hi, Denise. How are you? Oh, and there's Lee. Lee. Go live with. I can see you on. Lee Muser joined. I think you have to accept the. There we go.
Yeah.
I see you.
All right, so let's see here. Let me negotiate with my phone. And okay, say something so I can test my sound here.
Here we are
okay,
with Lee Muser of Integrative
good.
Healing.
Great, I hear you great, and I'm not hearing any feedback, which is one of our favorite things, to not hear feedback.
I know, okay. Right? And I've got a kind of echo chamber going because I've got one earbud connected to Zoom and the other to Instagram Live.
Okay, yeah.
But we will definitely have fun exploring a little bit about the topic of consent because it's just so big. And I was wondering before we get into the nitty-gritty if you wanted to share how you're coming to the topic of consent, Lee, because we all have different backgrounds.
Right. I mean, that's a really, really good question and a really good point. I would say I'm coming to this question as a practitioner, like as a somatic trauma therapist. Mm-hmm. I'm coming, really, that's a huge part of my practice is consent. And I teach my students a consent-based inquiry. I teach my students consent-based facilitation. So consent is a big topic in my profession, but it's also a big topic really in all the areas that I'm in, all the organizations that I'm a part of, all the, the groups that I'm involved with. We talk about consent a lot. We try to practice consensual practices. And then there's the relationships and dating and sex and but there's also parenting, right? So it's like consent is a big one. This is, I'm sure, something that we have not, it has come in and out of our conversations, not like on purpose,
right?
But I know that we parent consensually. We try to parent consensually. We work really hard, actually, at parenting consensually, which I love about us. I love about you. Like, it's inspiring when I hear your stories about how you parent. It's like, oh yeah, it reminds me this is how I want to parent. I want to parent consensually as well. So that's a long answer, but how about you? Like, what are you thinking of?
Oh, I love it that you brought parenting into it because I was thinking about what's coming up for me for this conversation, and definitely parenting is a big one because it sort of sets the stage for later life and how we think about consent. We don't realize how much of the way we parent, the way we teach, helps people navigate consent, right? So even if we're not in a situation where consent needs to be managed in the moment, in those moments when it does, how everyone navigates that influences your future life. So that'll definitely come up when we're official at 9. And I trained as a nurse and I worked in the hospital setting very briefly. And then later moved to more teaching, so where you don't touch people. But I think even with teaching, right? So yes, there's touching, but there's also teaching. Is that something you want to learn more with me about right now? If people aren't ready to learn, they can say they're not ready to learn. So I come from it from a touch and teaching perspective. And I'm lucky to be part of organizations that really do take consent seriously. And I'm in organizations far, far away, not here locally, but organizations far away where consent hasn't entered the conversation yet. And I'm always curious about that too. So,
like where that just isn't part of the culture yet.
Yet, exactly.
I mean, one thing I'm hearing you say is, you didn't use this language exactly, but consent with regards to being the touchy, like being touched, right? And this
Right.
is, I didn't mention this, but yeah, so I won't go into that yet because we're giving a few more minutes. But absolutely, there's something going on in my life right now that I am the student. I mean, I'm always the student, but let's get like
Right,
in this
right.
dynamic, like I'm definitely like in that role, and there is a lot of consent because I'm being touched, and so I'll bring that in
Yeah.
when we get going.
Yeah,
Although it
that's
feels like
great.
we've gotten going
Well,
already.
I know, right? But this is great. This is
Yeah,
wonderful. And
it is good.
you had sent out a request for questions
Mm.
on your list, and I'm wondering if you got any questions.
You know, I have. Let me just double check. I know that there were a lot of people really excited that I was doing this, and because the topic had been coming up in different circles, but there wasn't any specific questions. It was just more like we need to be having conversations about consent. We need to be like talking about consent. Why is consent not happening more? Like, how are we on so many wavelengths with regards to such an important topic? So those, I mean, that's a question, and I can answer that question, but yeah, I didn't. How about you?
I didn't get any questions, but I always have questions. So we will have lots to talk about. And of course, if anyone's watching live, you can put any questions or comments you want in the little box, and I'll try to keep up with those. If I miss those, we can type them in later when I post the entirety of the live.
There's two deer outside my window right now. I just want to name. Just good little nature updates, but
yeah. So we're official. It's 9:01, and we can get started with consent and body mindfulness.
Yeah, let's consent to begin this conversation.
Right? Well, that's the thing. We called each other up. We talked about, you know, how do we want to do this? How do we want to do it? And here we are again. And this is another opportunity to say, so are we still on board? How do we want to do this?
Yeah. We are still on board. How do we do it? So I think I'd like to start just by naming that consent culture is starting to get a little bit of traction. Mm-hmm. Let me make sure, like, I moved around a little bit, and I don't know if you can see me on IG because I can't pay attention to all these things at one time. But you can tell me, Anna Marie, if I go off
I will.
camera. I think consent culture is beginning to have more traction, but in general, it is still not on the table for conversations in a lot of areas. And as I wrote in my little blurb to promote this, I don't think that people know how disempowered we are in this culture, you know, because we advertise ourselves as like the land of the free, but then when we start to do research and look at history, we know that we're actually the land of coercion or enslavement, and some other things too. And yes, some freedoms of choice, of course, but it's a convoluted history that we have here in the United States and in North America, and really across a lot of lands, where choice is not a big component of our culture, you know, our thought constructs in our culture. And so when we don't have a lot of choice, we're going to have disempowerment, and those are really linked to consent. They're linked to being able to be aware of our self-knowledge. It's linked to be able to have conversations with myself of what I want and what I don't want, because if I'm in a culture that makes those choices for me constantly, or if I'm parented by parents, sorry, I just have to rearrange that. If I'm parented in such a way that I'm not given a lot of choice for myself, then I won't know I have that ability to make some important choices, and I'm already starting in a really disempowered place, and then I go into other cultures where consent isn't talked about, then it's a double whammy of disempowerment. Right. So I want to just name that consent is a convoluted topic, and it's a challenging one, and it isn't like a topic of gaining perfection. Like, we're not going to be perfect at this whole consent sitch. You know, we're going to be like struggling or getting to know, discovering ourselves in each dynamic, in each context. Like, oh, where am I in relation to this? Oh, I forgot to check in with myself. I forgot to check in with my friend. I forgot to check in with my student. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to mess up. And then can we be like, oh, let me learn from that and regain integrity, right?
Right. So really part of consent is not just the actual consent and the mistakes we all make, but revisiting the moment and having those conversations afterwards, so that it can be different next time, if it needs to be. And that's an important part that I've not heard talked about in conversations about consent. Consent isn't just about the moment; it's also about coming back and figuring out how you want to do it the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what restorative justice is really about. Restorative justice is also just a little tiny toddler in our culture, right? But restorative justice is about naming, like really slowing down to name, like, oh, what happened from both parties or all parties? Like, what happened?
Right.
What missteps were there? What adjustments do we need to make? What repair do we need to make? What conversations do we need to have? In a way that is kind and compassionate and honest, and then to move forward so that we can be in right relationship again after the episode or the situation.
Right. Or even if things went well, we're always tweaking and finding easier and better ways to communicate with each other, because I had a dance mentor actually, who said it in just such a great way. You have to teach other people how to be with you, because there is kind of that responsibility, which is tricky, but we do have a responsibility to know ourselves enough to communicate to other people what our needs and concerns are in the moment. So you have to teach other people how to be with you, and that can be a pleasant, incremental process over time.
Yeah, and I'm going to say, like, we're going to run into a lot of both and here, right? So ideally, say, in dating or in relationships, I am going to want to have a lot of self-knowledge and a lot of self-awareness as to my patterning, my patterning with other humans, so that I can say to the people that I'm dating or in dynamics with, or could be married too, in marriages, or across the board. Like, oh, I really need X before Z, or I just need, X in X situation or whatnot, right? And we want to know that because consent is so challenging and foreign to us, we want our partners, as partners, or as people involved in dynamics, to be able to ask those questions too. So it's really always going to be mutuality. That's how I look at it. It's always going to be mutuality. Nice. Am I disclosing my needs and wants? Am I asking the person I'm with their needs and wants? Well, of course, checking in with mine, right? So it is complicated. When it comes to power dynamics, right, here's where it gets a little bit different. I think if I'm going into a situation where there is a power dynamic, so when my clients are always in a power dynamic with me, like, even though the way that I work is very, very different than mainstream therapeutic culture, we have a lot of mutuality, my students and my clients. However, I'm always going to be in the power dynamic, upper seat, however we name that, right? So the responsibility is always going to lie on me, I think, is my opinion, Is it great if when clients can advocate for themselves? Like, absolutely. Is that important? For sure. Is it my job to help them? Yes. Is it my job to get that going? Absolutely. So when we're in a power dynamic, and I know I'm talking a lot here, and I know I want to hear what you have to say, because you're in the same situation. When we're in a power dynamic, then it's less percentage, if we're going to go for fun by percentages, it's less percent of responsibility on the client and more on the person with the more power, right? The facilitator, the therapist, etc. What do you think about that?
Regarding responsibility?
Yes, and responsibility.
So that's interesting. I can come at it from two different viewpoints. One is as a parent, so I'll start there and then go to as a teacher or facilitator. So as a parent, when our children were very small, we wanted them to learn when they felt like saying no, right? So it meant that if we were brushing their hair and they said no, we had to stop, right? Because we wanted them later to be able to say, I don't like that, that doesn't feel good, or that doesn't work for me right now. And so I still have this sort of reflexive habit that I have to get out of, where I'd be like, I'm not touching you, because they'd need that reassurance. Because otherwise, a lot of us, myself included, have this habit, which was set up by power dynamics, right? Because the implication is, the implied idea is that we have to do what the people in power want, and sometimes I'm guessing.
That's it, yeah.
We have to do what they want, we're guessing, and so maybe it hurt when they were brushing my hair, but I didn't say anything, because after the first time, I learned that that was not going to get me in their good graces.
That's right.
Not that anyone was horrible or abusive, but that did train into me a reflexive yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And so power dynamics like that, if not negotiated really carefully, train in a reflexive yes. And so then we don't even know when we want to say no.
Right.
And that's tough. That's tough. And as a facilitator, though, where I try to make it a more equal relationship, well, let me step back and go back to parenting. So as our children have gotten older, these conversations are less in the moment and right away, because we know each other better. But I'm a very unchill co-pilot, right? So when my kid is driving, sometimes I get scared and I go, ah! So my child can calmly turn to me, because they know I'll listen and say, you know, it really distracts me when you scream. I need you to speak in a lower tone of voice.
Right, yeah. That's great.
And the reason I bring this up is because I think we all get hung up, myself included, on thinking we need to understand. And we don't need to understand or agree even. We don't need to agree. We don't need to understand. They just communicated a need, and I just have to accept it as a stated need. And then together we need to figure out what to do. Now, that doesn't mean that their needs are going to take precedence over my needs, which is why we need to slow down and take the time outside of the context, which is why, like, anything medical and in the moment is so hard, but why we need time outside of the context to either revisit the event or, you know, plan ahead, be like, well, this is what works better for me. And then I could say, like, I get scared, so what could I do instead? Or what could we do to avoid, you know? So that's where power.
So in the moment, we just hear the no or the yes. We don't try to get the understanding. We don't, like, try to break it down. We don't go, but why? Or last time, or I thought. We just like, we let ourselves pause and hear the no or the yes. And then later we can digest that together. We can unwind that, like, oh, okay, in X situation, you know, you said no, and I'm just curious about that, you know, and then we can learn about our partners or our people, I should just say our people, later. But in the moment, to let ourselves not understand why. Oh, that is so huge. Like, I actually feel a relief in my nervous system of that. Like how, like, my system is like, oh gosh, like what a kind thing to just be able to have a no or a yes heard and not have to justify. Because I think this goes back, you know, to probably my childhood, where everything had, like, it didn't get autonomy and choice. So it was always a struggle. So, and I have had partners who I have said no to, and there is just like, okay, you know, we don't, okay. And it's almost weird when you're not used to it. It's almost like, do they not care? Why are they not asking me? Why, you know? But it's actually the opposite. It's such respect to be like, yeah, okay. Of course, I've also had partners who did the opposite,
Right.
you know, which is more
I'm sorry.
typical. But yeah.
So let's dig into the complicated part if you want. I'll throw this out there. Tell me what you think. Where we ask for consent and the person gives us a reflexive yes.
I love that phrase, by the way.
And you can see in the face, and that's where I tend to slow down and then ask, you know, I'm not hearing that clearly. Can you give me a clear yes or no?
Yeah.
And then depending on what they say, then that's how it plays out. But it is really difficult for me because I want to be so, I should preface this by saying I was, I had severe medical trauma where there was no consent. So that's why consent is such a big deal for me. I run into issues when then it's like, I have to go by people's words because that's what we have to communicate with.
Yep.
And I can't just keep asking, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?
Yes.
And yet there is this very real phenomenon of the reflexive yes. Is that someplace you want to go right now?
Yeah, let's do that. I love that phrase, reflexive yes. I also would say it's adjacent or very nearby fawning, which fawning for me has been a very much a way of life for me. It's a trauma response. And so the fawning is to say yes, and it can happen from a frozen state. So how much are we consenting when we're either in a frozen state or inebriated? Well, there's actually very little autonomy in either, right? So the consent is guised, right? So that reflexive, but we can call it the reflexive yes. But I just want listeners to know that if they know the language of fawning, it can be useful. And I have, in my blog posts, I've named how I have fawned my way through lots of situations, and that may be sexually as well, to, you know, as a way to have safety in a dynamic in the way that I knew how to get it, right? So reflexive yeses, I think, you know, I'm not sure exactly what I don't think we're answering a particular question. We're just discussing the topic, right? So and this, you know, it's like context is everything. So what context are we talking about? But really we could talk about, in almost any context, a repeated questioning is important. And it doesn't have to look like, are you sure? It can really just look like, can I touch you? Can I adjust your leg now? Or like in my context, like I'm learning Muay Thai, and my coaches, they always ask, and I get coached by one more than the other, and they always ask, and they ask because consent culture is super important with physicality, right? And they know that, so they will always ask. And like we've been in training for a long time now, so I can't imagine the scenario of no, but they still always ask, right? Can I touch you now? Can I move your arm? Can I hold your leg? Can I? So there is a perpetual checking in, even though they've checked in many, many times before. And they don't say, are you sure? But they ask me. And then, yes, at that point, there is some mutual responsibility for me to mean my yes. And there is some responsibility for them in the higher power dynamic to be sussing out if I'm pushing past a boundary. And this is really subtle territory, and this is what we're talking about, right? And so if we come back to the reflexive yes, and I might, maybe I have a client that's really wanting to please me, because unfortunately or fortunately, we do that. We want to do that with our practitioners. We want to please them. And so there might be ways that I don't say, are you sure? But I might suss into that a little bit. I might, you know, again, context is everything, so I can't think of a perfect example, but there might be other questions that I bring in, or I'm just going to go really, really slow.
Exactly.
Right? And I might say, I'm going to do this now, or we're going to do this now. And like, please is this sounding resonant for you? Or we could go a different direction. So they're given choice sometimes, you know, or they're at least checked in with in the moment, in a slowed down moment.
I haven't tried it yet. but in the same vein as slowing down and asking the question slightly differently.
Yeah.
Feminist midwife, whom I really like, talks a lot about consent, and I think she did a workshop here in Bloomington at Tandem on consent. Maybe she'll be back. I was traveling at the time.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
It would, but she suggests after consent has been obtained, saying, now I'm going to do X. Let me know when you're ready.
Okay.
Because then the student or client can be in charge of the pacing and can change their mind. It's another opportunity to change your mind. It's another opportunity to check in with yourself. And I like that. I haven't been able to try it out yet, but
yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. I think I know that that language definitely comes out of my mouth with my clients and students, is let me know when, right? And then yeah, I mean, I think our students and our clients and our patients, whatever we name them, they need to know that we're on their team.
Right.
We need to know that we're for them. So even, when I might say, let me know, like I let them know, I'm right here with you. We're going to take a little time to be quiet, or, and I might remind them, like, take as long as you need, or, I also say things like, if you're not sure what I mean, just like ask and I'll rephrase it, right? So that it's related to consent. It's related to, mutuality, a mutuality of exchange. And there can't be mutuality if I'm doing something that is not understood, or if there's not like a lining up, if you're with a client and you're doing some kind of course I've been your client before, but if you're doing something and I need to know, my vigilance centers are going to go up, right? And that's not going to be useful for me or them if that happens. So to be slowed down and
it's tricky. It's tricky, and we're always improving upon it. I know I was talking with my husband, who's a physician, and we always have these conversations and we're always improving. And he said that he's changed so that when he has someone who wants to move on to the physical exam, he says, I'd like to physically examine you. I'm going to touch this to find out this, touch this to find out this. Is that okay with you? And then they get on the table. And that sounds so nice compared to how I grew up, which was like, okay, hop on the table. I'm going to examine you.
Right. Yeah.
So we're always tweaking things. And I don't know if you've thought about this, but I was thinking about, because we're talking about touch, but also ideas, but touch is tricky in that our self is often beyond our physical self.
Yeah.
Is that somewhere you've gone in your thought patterns before? Because I
want to hear more. I want to make sure we're on the same page. So can you say more?
Right, sure. So of course I was trained, and it makes perfect sense that anyone with a wheelchair or assistive device or anything like that, that is part of their body. You do not touch it without permission. You do not lean on it. You do not pick it up for them. That is their body. It is and which makes sense from my current training, which is, they're going to map that to their body. It's used so often.
Yeah.
But I personally extend that to, the yoga mat you're on becomes part of your territory, your part of your boundaries. And it's such a thing that I was laughing at myself, because I went to a conference once where there were a lot of therapists, and they had the little breakfast bar, and I saw someone put the toast in the toaster, and they walked away, and the toast came up, and I was standing there, and I could have taken the toast out of the toaster, but I looked over at them and said, may I take your toast out of the toaster?
Yeah.
Because that's an extension of the self in some ways, right? So has that come into your thinking at all?
Yeah, I'm pondering what you're saying to my context.
Mm.
And I'm kind of, I feel it's hovering, like I feel it's right here, but I can't quite,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd like to hear like more from you of how this is like, what, like with the yoga mat, I get that, like that's really defined, and that seems like, or a wheelchair or something like, which actually in disability justice is, we're very, very disability justice uninformed in this culture. So that, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think a lot of us don't think about that. And it is important to think about, right? And so then when you extend to the yoga mat, or to like, how many times have we been in a chair and our chair's been moved for us, like at a restaurant, like I'm just going to move your chair, or like proximity, right? So the space that we're in is messed with without our consent. And in my profession, yeah, I don't know how that would apply exactly. Like when I have clients in, like I would never just put a blanket on them, for example. I would, so that their surroundings are their surroundings. I tend to not be in their immediate space, but sometimes I might ask them, would you like me to sit next to you right now? Would you like for my arm to be touching your arm? Would you like my arm, so there's definitely a lot of very slow stepped consent questions within that context. I meet a lot of people on Zoom, so it never comes up in that dynamic. But I don't, when I'm in a yoga class, I'm hyper aware of even people walking around my mat, let alone on my mat, right? And so I don't want people, like, I want to know ahead of time if the practitioner is going to be walking around. I actually like that safe porting, to say, like, I'm going to be walking around during the class, and so you might hear me moving around. And then, of course, I would want the practitioner, the teacher, to ask for consent before touching my body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just came up for me in a new way because, the other day I had full consent to help someone, and in fact they were very much like, help me now, with hands on. And so I wasn't as slow as I usually am, and I became aware that the person behind me, who had not asked for help, I wasn't on their space, but I could, and I didn't sense lack of ease, but it occurred to me to ask myself, oh, am I maybe kind of encroaching on this person's space a little by helping this other person?
And you're nearby, you're near them, this other person.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, hopefully people set themselves up in the room. Like, I like to be in a corner with my back protected where no one can get near me. Right. So hopefully people set themselves up in that way. But it occurred to me like, oh, maybe I could, because I'm always trying new things. Like maybe I could just help people understand that the more space they leave around themselves, the less likely I am to encroach their little bubble.
Yeah. Right. And even maybe to say at the beginning, like, if you're a person that doesn't want me walking near them, to position yourself over, and that, that's a really good idea. I think of that as like that safe porting, like to let them know ahead of time what might be coming or going on that's going to impact them. I'm kind of, my mind is coming back to like the dynamics of sexuality, and which this is probably where, this is it's louder in that context, of personal autonomy and ownership with regards to clothing, with a lot of different things. I think there's a lot of rearranging that's happening. Hummingbirds are now coming to my feeder. So the deer have left, but the hummingbirds are coming in. There's a lot of rearranging of mentality with regards to consent and sexuality. And we hinted on that earlier. But it can feel really awkward, I think, only because it's foreign to our culture to ask repeatedly, is it okay if you know, and it's, again, it's only awkward because we're really used to assumptions, and we're really used to not, like we're used to a model portrayed through the media of ravaging and being ravaged, and of just being taken over and taking over another body, and another body taking over ours. And our culture has romanticized that.
Exactly.
And our nervous systems have been distorted to mistake that as love and care and desire and all things good and value. Even like, oh, if somebody ravages me, I'm valued, right? So we really have a big setup for dysregulation, we could say, right? So when we slow down, we're slowing down from a perspective of honoring regulation. And you have to have consent and choice to be in regulation. Like regulation involves choice. If we're not in choice, we're going to be dysregulated a little bit.
Thank you for naming that. Yeah. When we're not in choice, we're going to be dysregulated.
Right. So our part of our brain is going to be, like the reptilian part of the brain is going to be going into over time.
Yeah.
It's going to perceive threat or danger when we don't have choice. It's just science, you know, but it also makes sense psychologically. So I think I've had partners who taught me consent culture, and I remember saying to them, like, it doesn't feel romantic.
Until it
doesn't
does.
feel right. It doesn't feel like it feels awkward. It feels, I don't remember the words I used exactly. And they're like, yeah, that's like, but, and then they explained it to me, but think about it from your nervous system. Yeah. Like your nervous system is this is how a nervous system is safe, is when we're asked a question. And is there any, it doesn't feel sexy. Is there anything actually sexier than a co-regulated nervous system? I mean, boom, right? So at this point now in my life, it's like when somebody asks, like, it's the sexiest thing ever. It's like, it's so yummy to be asked, can I do this? Can I touch there? Can I, is my hand okay here? Yeah. And it can be just as simple as holding hands or like legs on another person's legs, like, is this okay? Are we like just snuggling? Is this okay? And then the nervous system the nervous system is actually given some care to say yes or no. Like we're really in ourselves, and we're really in mutuality with not just ourselves and our moment, but the other person that we're with. Right. So I'm just like, even talking about it, I feel my system just feels so soft and gooey and like, oh, yes, like, yes, this is what we need. But it will be awkward, I think, at first for certain people. Maybe not the younger generations. I don't know.
Not the younger generations. Yeah.
Thank you, younger generations.
I know, right? And I have to say, I'm really grateful for having younger family members who have taught me about fan fiction. I don't read fan fiction, but the fact that it's all tagged for is there consent, is there dubious consent, and so that means that people are thinking about things and naming them. And they know what they all look like. And if there's questions like, is this really consent or not? People start talking about it. And it's out in the open. And I love that. I did not realize, I did not even know that people were tagging things for consent.
That's awesome. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Like we really want to, I'm thinking about it in terms of like a green flag and a red flag, and like an orange flag. Like if we green flag our moments, right? And we don't take one yes as an all-inclusive yes. So I said yes to this, so that means anything goes, right? That's just not going to be the case in the doctor's office, on a yoga mat, and like on the couch, like with parenting, like just to get green lights along the way, you know, in a process is again, what might feel awkward at first, but it is a we-ness. It is from a we-ness. It's from an us-ness, or it is from mutuality to do that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And go ahead.
Well, I'm also thinking, like with my students, what I teach them an inquiry process that I call consensual inquiry, and so it's a self-awareness practice, and it is getting to know, you know, our internals in relation to our externals, and it's getting to know our somatic systems. And I remember demoing me doing a somatic consensual inquiry with myself, and I was I'm in that process. In the practice, the person, I'll just use me as an example, I asked myself, like, okay, I'm noticing, you know, like right now, I'm the way I'm sitting is there's a little bit of a squeezing of my thighs. I'm noticing a squeezing happening in this moment, and I'm noticing my belly's feeling soft, which is actually really nice. And I might just be continuing to meander and just notice the positioning, like, oh, my right foot is really on the floor, and that's feeling really stable. I'm noticing like a cushion behind my back. I haven't gotten to any consensual questions yet, but I'm just kind of meandering. But I might be checking in with a subtext of, yeah, is it okay that the right foot's on the floor? Is it okay that this pillow is behind my back? Is it okay that there's squeezing in my thighs? Or does that area need some space? I actually really like it right now, the way that my body is positioned. But if I don't ask myself, is this position working for me? Then I won't know. Now, my suspicion is in about 10 minutes, this position, probably less, but it won't work for me because at some point my bladder is going to catch up with myself and it's going to be full. And then it probably won't be comfortable. But how many times have we overridden needing to go to the bathroom?
Right.
Or not even noticed, like, oh my gosh, I've got to go now because I have not been checking in with myself. I have not been practicing consensual inquiry or just asking myself simple questions with how I'm doing, how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And so I skip over all that. But in one of the demos I was doing, I was feeling some anxiety and I was feeling some contraction in maybe in my belly, and I was naming that. I was just doing it out loud, like I was just kind of doing it just now. Normally it's just done internally, quietly. But I said, like, oh, there's a holding in my belly. And I asked that clenching, like, is there anything that you'd like to say or express, or do you need anything, right? There's all really useful questions. And then there was another question I asked, like, would you like to spend more time here? And the answer was actually no. Like, no, I don't want to spend more time here right now. And I was really curious, like, oh, I didn't know that was coming, right? So if I didn't ask, I might just push forward. I might be like, there's discomfort, we need to get in there, figure out what's going on. Or I might run away because I don't want, like, oh, there's discomfort, let's go somewhere else. Like, I might just make assumptions. But when we slow down in consensual inquiry, we're asking the question to see what the system is actually wanting.
Yes.
Now, that is an exquisite opportunity for consent. And if we could have that kind of exquisite slowed downness in all of our other dynamics, that would be lovely. I know our culture is not set up for that, but it is something to, consider, like, how fast am I moving? And can I give myself the gift of slowing down so I can really ask my system, like, what it's actually really wanting.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because I do talk about pain sometimes because the type of movement I teach can be really good for pain. But one thing that I talk about that I haven't heard other practitioners talk about is that part of this, because of course the dogma we're taught in my modality is that you feel better through movement. But for me and with my background, part of feeling better is also empowering myself to decide if and when I'm going to engage with the pain through movement.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And that's not always acknowledged.
Which is
No,
huge.
but
To be given the choice of if and when. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, no, that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, it's like, I'm like, Anna Maria, we have got to slow down to just name how huge that is. We do not, that gift of choosing when and if is not given to us from the outside, but it's often we don't know how to give it to ourselves, and we just steamroll ourselves constantly, you know, and we re-traumatize ourselves constantly because we sometimes also don't know how else to use attention.
Yeah.
So if I'm experiencing pain and my attention, my neuroplasticity is magnetized to the pain, it can't help it, but I don't like it. So there's this constant push-pull going on, right? And we can probably all relate to that on some level. I don't like it, but I can't look away. Like, so this is like this push-pull, but because I don't know, no one's taught me where else I can just gently place attention and rest and get out of the vigilance cycle. Right.
And when we can line up with our system, it feels hugely relieving. I can remember one time feeling like I wanted to procrastinate, and then thinking, well, I feel like I need to procrastinate. Let's stop and call it rest.
Yeah.
And immediately my body went, right? And instead of taking this whole long time to ignore this feeling of I need rest, and then finally resting and needing a long time to delve into it, I could do what my body was asking for in the moment.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And feel immediate relief. Like it was immediate whole system relief. It was really wild.
Yeah. To not fight with ourselves is relieving.
Yeah.
And I think we don't know the questions to ask ourselves to stop fighting. You know, we're trying to manage ourselves, we're trying to fix ourselves, we're trying to analyze ourselves, we're trying to get it right, not get it wrong. Like we're really caught in those binaries in our heads, and it just results in this push-pull.
Yeah.
And then to be able to slow down, and I could just feel like my shoulders got really tight with even naming all that. And then when I switched gears, it's like then my shoulders dropped, right? So when we slow down, to be like, okay, if I can step outside of supposed to, have to, shoulds, and this can go mean any dynamic, sexual, friend, yoga teacher,
work,
just me by myself, right? I step out of supposed to, shoulds, and have to, is like, what is calling right now? Like, what is the simplest calling right now? Okay, I am not ready to do X yet. I know there's a deadline. It's coming. I know I need to do it. I'm not quite ready right now. I need to rest. And then I might have a conversation with myself, not from a revved up place, but from a more regulated place. Like, and maybe I can return to X, you know, I can have that conversation after lunch. Or, right? But then I'm not in the push-pull struggle. I'm more in the consensual dialogue of needs and wants and possibilities.
Dialogue is key. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we don't need to understand or agree. We just need to figure it out.
Yeah. It doesn't have to make sense.
And we don't have to get it right even the first time. We figure it out, we think. So we try something. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But we learn something. And then we think of something else to try. And every time we refine and refine. And I'm bringing this up because it gets to what you had named earlier, which is that this is all really difficult at times, and it's really easy to fall into blame and shame. And if instead we can reframe it as a process of constantly tweaking, we don't need to I don't need to beat myself up for not resting when my body's calling for rest. I can just tweak the process and ask myself what I want and what I want to try next.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Well, yeah, I'm feeling like this has been a lot. And,
it is a lot.
I'm wondering if this is a good time to pause.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much for being willing to have this conversation.
Yeah. As
Excited
always,
to
a blast.
keep thinking about it. Yeah.
And I can't wait to see what pops into our attention next.
Yes, absolutely.
If anyone has questions they want to drop in the comments, we can always, when I post this as a perpetual evergreen, I don't know, so that people can look at it. We can answer those in the comments.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, good.
Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, so good to see you this morning.
Be well. Thank you for everyone who listened. Take care.